my name is Bernd Nordhausen. I work for Accenture, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. So I'm a cloud architect, and I'm actually certified across all the 3 major platforms. But of course, Google is my favorite child right now. So at Accenture, we have clients from all industry, and without exception, really, cloud is on top of their mind. And when I talk about cloud, I really mostly talk about public cloud or enterprise cloud. So when I mean cloud, I'm not talking as much about private cloud here. So our clients are usually, large enterprises and governments, and they have a substantial legacy footprint on-prem, and hence what they're really struggling with is moving to the cloud. So today I really want to talk to you about, some of the strategies of moving into the cloud and how we approach it. So my agenda is actually quite straightforward, nothing fancy here. I will tell you a little bit about Accenture and how we work with Google. Then I give you a little bit background on setting sort of the context actually. What are some of the drivers now to move to the cloud? Then I'll talk about cloud migration that really takes the bulk of it. And then if I have some time, I'll want to talk, a couple of case studies which I think are just quite interesting that we've done here on Google Cloud. So with that, I assume that most of you have heard about Accenture. We are one of the largest professional services companies, and we're actually now approaching 500,000 employees. So nearly 500,000 employees, which is actually, when I first started at Accenture, it's just really staggering number. Now, one of the things that really sets us apart from other professional service companies that we have this deep industry knowledge. So we are centered around verticals, and whether it's mining, whether it's oil and gas, FS, public sector, we have a lot of this really deep industry knowledge that we combine with our technical knowledge. Now, in Singapore, we've been here for a long time, over nearly 45 years, and we're actually, again, sort of the size. We now have about 3,000 employees here in Singapore, and yes, we're hiring. If you're interested in joining a really exciting company, please come and talk to me. Now, most of you have been touched by Accenture because we actually work with a lot of particular government agencies here in Singapore. And so I would venture to say everybody of you here in this room has touched a system that was done by Accenture. So at Accenture, we really live and breathe cloud. As the saying goes, we eat our own dog food. And so we really know what we're talking about, and it also has taken us a few years to move into the cloud. But we are now, over 95% of our systems are now in public cloud. We're spread around, the different cloud providers. We started, about 5 years ago with just moving, our website to the public cloud, and then just move more and more, including our mission-critical systems. So all of our SAP systems are now in the cloud, and soon I think we're going to be 100% in the cloud, in public cloud. And so we can. We've been through this journey, and when we talk to our clients, we can really relate to them. What are some of the challenges? And that's really what I want to talk to you about. Now, in terms of working with Google, we've been working for Google, for quite some time. We've been, 8 times now Google Partner of the Year. We've been working with Apogee, and we have 6 of the Google specializations. In terms of, here's some of the numbers, and I don't want to go through with them, but again, it's sort of that size that really where we can bring that in. And this is the thing that I find so interesting at Accenture, and I actually haven't been at Accenture all that long, but I mentioned that deep industry knowledge, so we can tab onto that. But we also have this deep technical knowledge. So if I need some experts, on some obscure technology, usually there is somebody in Accenture somewhere in the world, and it's actually quite easy for us to find them and to leverage into them. So what I want to tell you is that we've been really working with Google. We are a very, very close partner, and that's why I'm so delighted to be here today. Now, the way we work with Google is we have what we call AGBG, or the Accenture Google Business Group. That is sort of our vehicle to work with Google. And within that, we're focusing on 6 areas. One of them is SAP on GCP. So we are the largest SAP systems integrator, and we've been doing SAP very large deployments. And we are now working with Google very, very closely to move workloads onto GCP. And later this afternoon, there's actually a session on GCP and what are some of the advantages of putting SAP workloads on GCP. And I'm actually personally involved within a project here in the region on putting SAP on GCP. And it's actually quite exciting because there's some really technical, sort of differentiated technical advantages of moving it on GCP. So then we have cloud for marketing, and this is, again, leveraging one of the really the critical components of Google, not Google Cloud, but Google, which has the Google Cloud for marketing, and combining that with Google Cloud, using BigQuery. So that enables you to use your own data combined with Google marketing data, and then analyze that within the cloud and get insights on it. Another one then is sort of enterprise cloud services, and this is sort of what I'm talking to about, is a lot of app migration, data migration, and generally sort of moving more of the the footprint, the on-prem footprint into the cloud. The other 2 or 3 areas, and I won't spend much time on it. One is next generation application development. So we have a whole practice on it. We're talking cloud native app modernization. Intelligent agent, we actually have a demo on this in our booth, and I would like to invite you to go to that booth. And then workforce productivity, it's around G Suite. So these are sort of the 6 focus areas that we are working with within Google Cloud. So before I go into the details and give a little bit more background on migration, what I really want to do is to give you some context around cloud. And what we've done is we just released a study. We had a very large scale study about over 8,000 companies in 20 industry, 22 countries, including Singapore. And we looked at companies, high growth companies, as well as sort of some companies that are more in declining, that actually have declining revenues. And what we looked at was, okay, how do they use technology? How do they use advanced technologies such as AI, machine learning, blockchain? And then also, how widespread is it? How do they adopt technology? And then the third sort of factor is really sort of their readiness for technology adoption. So think of it as sort of like an assessment, a maturity assessment across these factors. And then we correlated that with their growth rates. And what we found is that if you sort of look at 2 buckets, sort of leaders in innovation and laggards in innovation, that there was actually a pretty big gap. So leaders in innovation grew about twice as fast as the laggards. So here is a really substantial reason of why to adopt new technology, because this survey showed that new technology adoption, technology leaders have higher growth rates. And then if you look sort of on the left, what does it actually mean to the finance guys? How much money do you leave on the table? And I have towards the end I'll show you. I have a link to the paper there. It's quite interesting. Now, when we look at this, is okay, what are some of the areas then, where they invested, where the technology leaders, what do they actually use, And and then we charted this, and then if you look at this chart, and I don't want to go into the numbers, but that's sort of the difference between the leaders and the laggards. And I just want to highlight a few items here. You know, in terms of tech adoption, they're looking at cloud as an innovation catalyst, whereas laggards look at cloud as a data center. And if you really think about that, that's a really fundamental difference, you know? And when I talk to clients, I always ask them, why do you want to move to the cloud? You know, what are the rationale behind it? And if people are saying, oh, like cost, and it's like, yeah, I just want to close my data center. To be honest, not a great reason to move to the cloud, you know? Where you really get the benefit is to use, you know, all the opportunities and technology that cloud can offer. And so, and this survey really proves is that companies that look at it as a cloud for an innovation catalyst really benefit from it. You know, then we're talking about architecture. Of course, everybody's talking about decoupled data. You know, decoupled architectures, agile. You know, whatever that means, to be quite honest, you know. But if we're looking at it sort of on the right-hand side, and this is one of the things that I find working with clients, is the biggest challenge for them is actually changing their culture. Going from a siloed approach, you know, to a more, you know, horizontal approach, where the different teams are actually connected. So you don't have a database team and an application team and an infrastructure team that never talk to each other, but you know, you really look at, you know, sort of application team that are, you know, looking across the horizontal area and looking at sort of, you know, this whole DevOps approach. So again, so what I wanted to do here really is sort of set the context that the primary reasons to go to the cloud is not about cost anymore. It's about, you know, taking advantage of the innovation, taking advantage of these huge investments that, you know, Google is putting into the cloud, and those are the reasons. So, how do you actually go into the cloud? Now, as I said, our clients are usually, you know, large enterprises and governments. We work with sort of the digital natives, the cloud natives, but what we find, cloud natives, particularly on the IT, they often do it themselves. They have no legacy. They just go straight to the cloud. So what I want to talk about is those enterprises, and, you know, that have substantial footprint in on-prem and then want to move into the cloud and want to take advantage of the technologies here. So, as I said, these are some of the reasons, and one of the things I think there is a shift in the industry is that 2 to 3 years ago it was all about cost. It's like, oh, why do you want to move to the cost? I want to save money. That was what we heard the main driver. Nowadays, we hear that less and less again, and to be honest, I don't think it's a great reason for a whole nother, and that's a topic for a whole nother, you know, talk. But, you know, looking at about modernizing your services process, being more agile, you know, reducing that release cycle, these are some of the reasons that we are now seeing to go to the cloud. So increase the speed of your business. So the way we approach it is actually relatively straightforward. We go into companies and do an assessment, then we actually perform the migration, and then we look actually operating it, you know, and then sort of optimizing it for the cloud. So when we go in there, we have different entry points, and that is around, you know, we can do a cloud strategy, or often just sort of an assessment. What are the things that you actually have here? Which on the applications that can move into the cloud, which ones can, you know? Then once you have done that, then we can look at, now, how do you actually perform that? And there are tools out there, you know, Velostrada from Google Cloud is one of them that helps you migrate that. But then you're not done. One of the things, and I mentioned that earlier, is one of the biggest changes is this cultural change. How do you actually operate in the cloud? How do you optimize for it? We talk to clients, they said, oh, I moved to the cloud, I thought my costs go down, but they don't. They actually go up. Why is that so? And they said, well, do you analyze your bill? Do you look at, are you using your VMs optimal? Do you shut them down? And often the answer is, well, we don't have anybody to do that. And that's where you then think about, how do you operate in the cloud? How do you change your business processes? So, how do people move to the cloud? So we sort of mapped out there 4 ways of doing it. The first one is what we call the right way. It's like you just start. You don't have anything legacy. You have new application. You just go straight to the cloud. You do it sort of the cloud native way. And to be honest, that's the easiest way. The second one, and this is what we see mostly, is sort of this purpose-driven migration and optimization, and I'll spend some time on that. What we're also then seeing is the third one is the integrated and managed coexisting, hybrid cloud. So again, I think there is a shift in the industry where 2 or 3 years ago, everybody expected, oh, we're all moving into the public cloud. And some companies like ourselves, we can do that. But most companies say, no, we want to keep something there. And how do you then manage that? And there is actually an interesting article that one of my friends just published. His name is Gregor Hope. And it's, I forgot, but if you drop me an email, I'll mention it. Just search for the architect elevator. And he has a really, really interesting article about hybrid cloud, different ways of it. Now, fourth one is actually you can apply some of the cloud techniques. You can actually use that on-prem as well. So, for example, the whole concept of infrastructure as code, you can actually use that on-prem. Not as easy, not as straightforward, but it's certainly possible. And we're seeing that as well. So, but as I said, most of our clients really go into the sort of the migration, and they want to say, okay, I want to move to that. Can you work with? How do you approach that? And with this is the sort of the 5 or 6 R framework, which I think some of you will be familiar with it, but for some of you it might be new, and that's the reason why I want to cover this. This framework was first developed by Gartner a few years, and for some reason it's the 5 or 6 R, and so everything starts with an R. So when we look at applications, we look at, okay, what's the best way to move to the cloud? One of it is when everybody talks about lift and shift, what does it actually mean, lift and shift? Now, when we're talking about lift and shift, it is a complete rehosting. It's really, taking your virtual machine, lifting it and plopping it, making no change whatsoever. And that's where a lot of the tools come into place, Now, when you do that, to be honest, you don't get a lot of benefit from it, Remember when I first I set the context, looking at the cloud as a data center, that's really what the approach is. It's just a data center. You don't manage it, Google manages it. The other thing is then we're talking about replatforming. Replatforming is when you make still probably no changes to the application, but you use the managed services. So the prime example, of course, is going from a database, to a managed database. So when you don't have to manage anything, the cloud provider manages it, and you only manage the database. You don't manage the underlying database engine. You don't manage the OS. In both of these cases, the rehosting as well as the replatforming, you don't have to do any application changes. So from that effort, that way it's minimal effort involved in moving it, But to be quite honest, you don't get a lot of benefit from it. You don't get that elasticity of it. You don't get the all the sort of DevOps, all the tools that are in there. You just don't get that, For that, you need to do what we call a refactoring. So refactoring is looking at your application and really sort of re-architecting it for the cloud. Now, that involves application change. And that, of course, is tough. If you have a 10-year-old application, are these developers still around? Most likely not. What tools do we use? So that's really sort of the toughest setup. Now, we added one which was called repurchasing, which is where you go to a SaaS service. Instead of using, you can just use G Suite. Everything is done for you, so you don't have to worry about your office productivity. You don't have to worry about email. You're using Gmail. All of that you can do is repurchasing, and then you do get the benefit of it. Now, two of the other factors are then is retain and retire. And these are all the things, particularly in the clients that we deal with, is a lot, well, it can't be moved. You have some old Solaris, you have DB2, sorry, not DB2, it's like some mainframe application. You just have to bite the bullet and says, well, we have to keep it. Or you can just retire it, meaning decommission it. It's like, okay, we're just going to shut it off. So this is sort of this 5 or 6 R framework and that we're approaching, and it's sort of pretty much industry standard. Now, one of the things that I then talked about is actually how do you operate in the cloud? It is a fundamental change, and this is the thing is where we work with clients where we're seeing is that is one of their big challenges because it does require a cultural change, So you now have to look at, ongoing cloud operations, around security. How do you manage that? How do you do your skills? How do you develop those skills? All of this, we sort of call it under the cloud management. Second, then, is optimization. And that is really a continuous process. It's not just, you do it once and then you're done. No, you have to do it on a continuous basis. You have to monitor your cloud spend. If you've seen, the cloud bill of companies, these are, thousands of lines. And the toughest part of this is it's a few dollars here, a few dollars there. And so you say, well, I can spend a lot of time, and, well, if I do this and then, I save $20 a month. So doesn't really do anything. It takes me more effort, So using automated tools or using an outsourcer such as ourselves, we can facilitate with that. And we can actually show and how to save money, 20 to 30% by simple things, just like, turning things off, development and QA machines over the weekend, looking at zombie processes, looking at, what are some of the machines that are oversized or under-provisioned. And then, also, I'm just working with a client, and they've actually asked us to open up their, the Google account for the POC under our account. And say, why do you want to do that? Well, we don't have a master agreement yet, and it's going to take us 6 months to create a master agreement with a cloud provider now, just because of our internal processes. So can you do it for us? And again, this is sort of coming back to some of the struggles, which are not technical at all, but it's rather sort of organizational, and that's really what we can help with as well. And then, of course, the whole innovation. The reason, why the cloud is so exciting is about all of these new services, AI, IoT, machine learning, data analytics. That's why things are so exciting here. So this is what I want to leave you with is, sort of migration is a continuous process. You start with the assessment, you start with the planning, then you actually execute it, and then once you're in the cloud, then you have to look at how to operate the cloud, and it does require changes. So with that, I'm pretty good on time. I just want to talk about 2 case studies that we're working on, and that sort of shows us some of the stuff that's actually happening in the cloud. So the first one is a migration that we did for a Spanish insurance company called BBVA, which is around SAP. So as I mentioned, SAP on Google Cloud is actually a very exciting area. And there are some really big advantages of running SAP in the cloud, And that's one of the key lessons here that we state here. It's the third one, is no commitment of use, So, and one thing, from Google, we'll talk about that. But one of the challenges with SAP, it's not a very, shall I say, cloud-friendly environment, because it's very static. There's no elasticity in general, So when you go, and particularly now with the move to S/4HANA, where you really have to look at this is, okay, my data is going to grow. And so now I have to look at it and say, okay, I need to plan 3 years in ahead, and what machine size do I need 3 years in ahead? So I want to sort of lock that in order to get that discount, which really makes it, quite attractive. Now, one of the things with Google, which is so exciting, is that they don't have that concept because everything is virtualized. You only say, okay, this is how much I'm going to spend, and you're going to get the discount. And so what that means is you can actually start with a slower machine, a smaller machine, and grow as you go, while still getting that discount. And in particular for SAP, because we're talking large machines, that's really, really significant. Another one, and so I have to say I'm a little bit biased because before I joined Accenture, I was with Intel for many, many years. Though I don't own any Intel stock anymore, so I don't have any conflict of interest. Is Google Cloud uses or adopts the latest in technology faster than any of the other guys. And in particular, there's one interesting technology called Optane, which is a new memory technology. Which is basically targeted for SAP for in-memory workloads. So the official name is called Intel Optane Data Center Persistent Memory or something like that. But if you're interested in SAP, I recommend going to the session with Winsing from Google, who will talk about that. And so this is the architecture that we've implemented there. And so I don't know, is it? No, it's actually not in here, but that was one of the reasons too, so when you have SAP then you can actually use the big data analytics tool, particularly BigQuery from Google, to connect directly to your SAP instance and do a lot of analysis and get a lot of benefit of your data. Okay, another interesting example is that what my colleague worked on is actually Manri is a bank in Japan. Now, if you think about finance and banking, they're really some of the last, most reluctant to move into the cloud, But this is a bank that actually, it's a new digital bank that says, okay, we're going to go full on cloud. And what's really interesting about here is that they used Cloud Spanner as a database layer. Now, Cloud Spanner is a service from Google Cloud, which is, I don't think it's really gotten the credit that it deserves. It hasn't been that widely adopted, but it's a horizontally scalable database, and I've heard they've gotten some really incredible performance on that. And so this is a case where they actually implemented core banking on the cloud. So this is what we call the next generation application development. There's no legacy involved. They actually start with it, and this is a great project for this. Now, with that, I'm running out of time. So I do want to leave you with it. So this is my contact information. If you're interested in contacting me, and if you're interested in, as I said, we're hiring. Put a plug in there. But here's that white paper that I mentioned. This is the URL, probably a long URL. But if you search for Accenture Future Systems, this will pop up. It's a really interesting perspective. As I said, it's like, now this is the thing that we as Accenture, really can provide is that deep industry knowledge, and we have these contacts. So I found it really, really interesting, because it gives, me as a solutions architect, I'm also getting driven into, I'm not a finance guy, but as a solution architect, I always get asked those questions. So I highly recommend that paper. And with that, I think I'm right on the dot for the next speaker. Thank you so much.